As we talk about Benjamin Netanyahu's speech in front of a joint session of Congress yesterday, some saw this as a historic speech. Others saw it as a political speech in front of an election in 2 weeks. Others saw it as a slap in the face of the Obama administration. Where do you see this landing, and what is this?
Well, look, the speech was not an attempt to inject ourselves into your politics, or an attempt to use you to be injected into our politics. And unfortunately, some people perceive the speech that way. That was not the case. It was also not an attempt to show any disrespect whatsoever to the president, to the office of the presidency. That's the last thing that we intended, and no disrespect was intended in any way. I can only tell you that the Prime Minister felt a very deep moral obligation to speak up at a critical time about an issue that could threaten the survival of Israel, and that is if Iran is allowed, basically, to get nuclear weapons. And our concern is that the deal that is being negotiated right now is a deal that would pave Iran's path to the bomb rather than block it. And that's why the Prime Minister had to come and speak, and that's why he made, I think, a very detailed and policy-oriented speech to the Congress, and we were very pleased with the reception that the Prime Minister received on both sides of the aisle.
Right now, the Iran negotiations are continuing, and this is with the U.S., with Britain, with China, with France, with Germany, with Russia. The German foreign minister came out and said that the more progress has been made in the last year than in the last decade. I'm guessing that you and the Prime Minister do not agree with that statement.
Well, I don't know what he means by progress. If he means that the P5+1 is making more concessions to Iran than they have in the last decade, then we wouldn't call that progress. You have to understand something, that the international community, the leading powers of the world, the P5+1, are making decisions that could threaten the very survival of Israel. We don't have a vote there. And why we came to Washington, why the Prime Minister was so determined to come and he accepted the invitation of Speaker Boehner, was to give at least us a chance to have a voice in this debate. And what the Prime Minister outlined yesterday were two concessions that he thought were very, very problematic, and if they go through, would ensure that this would be a very bad deal. Bad deal for Israel, bad deal for the region, bad deal for the world. And the first concession was to leave Iran with a vast nuclear infrastructure in place. And the reason why that's a problem is that it would leave Iran a very short breakout time to the bomb. That's the time that it takes them to amass this uranium or plutonium for a nuclear device. The more infrastructure you leave, the less the breakout time. And he was saying the breakout time here is too short. Iran has a history of cheating. They've done it multiple times. Iran has a history of defying inspectors. They've also kicked them out. Inspectors just document violations. They don't stop it. So he said, don't leave Iran with such a vast nuclear infrastructure in place, and hope that inspectors and intelligence will do the job, because they haven't done the job in the past. And the second issue, and this was really new, Brian, with what the Prime Minister said, he said, don't have the restrictions that will be placed on Iran's nuclear program, don't have those restrictions removed before Iran changes its behavior. If Iran is going to continue its aggression in the region, it's going to continue its terrorism around the world, it's going to continue to threaten to destroy Israel and to work to destroy Israel, you should not remove the restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. If Iran becomes a normal country, then that's a different story. But they have to act like a normal country if they want to be treated like a normal country. That was the main point of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday.
The argument has been made, and we can talk about breakout time, that the nuclear structure in place right now in Iran is such that it would take a year before a bomb could be manufactured, could be deployed. And the idea then is that is ample opportunity and ample time for we as the United States, for the rest of the world to interfere or to intervene at that time.
Look, I would not gamble the security of the world on that proposition. You had a case in North Korea 20 years ago where you had inspectors in place. People made all sorts of assurances at the time. 20 years ago, 1994, an agreement was signed. The world came together. They hailed this agreement as stopping nuclear proliferation. They actually said at the time that it was going to bring North Korea into the global community. And what you had happen now, we're 20 years after it. North Korea is a rogue state with nuclear weapons that now experts say could have 100 nuclear weapons in 5 years. We don't want to be there with Iran, which is much more dangerous than North Korea, which has global ambitions. And unlike in the case of North Korea, that they had to violate the deal to get to a nuclear weapon, in this case, Iran could actually keep the deal and be put on the cusp of having enough enriched uranium to have an entire to fuel an entire nuclear arsenal. That's a very, very bad deal, and that's why the Prime Minister spoke about it yesterday.
President Obama, through John Kerry, put out there to freeze sensitive nuclear activities for 10 years. Iran came back today and said that is unacceptable. Is there a time frame here that Israel thinks is acceptable that would work in Israel's mind?
No, the time frame, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, should be conditioned on behavior. It should not be on automatic pilot. You don't make a deal and say, well, if it's 10 years or 20 years or longer, and say automatically restrictions on Iran's nuclear program will be removed. They'll be treated like a normal country. They could be like Japan is today, which is this massive infrastructure to actually get nuclear fuel. They should not have the ability to do that until they change their behavior. If Iran is going to continue with its aggression, they already control 4 Arab capitals, Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a in Yemen. If they continue to be the foremost sponsor of terrorism in the world, and Iran in the last 4 years has perpetrated terror attacks in 25 countries on 5 continents, and they are the foremost sponsor of terror in the world, and they have violated 6 UN Security Council's resolutions on their nuclear program, such a regime should not be on automatic pilot to seeing all the restrictions on their nuclear program removed. That just can't be done. So the time frame that he's looking for is conditional on Iran changing its behavior. If the optimists are right, and Iran is going to change its behavior, they're going to be a normal country, and this deal will lead to a completely different Iran, okay, then you can remove the restrictions. But if the pessimists are right, and this deal will only create a more aggressive Iran as its economy improves when sanctions are removed, and Iran continues its policies of aggression abroad, but they'll also have prosperity at home. If that's going to be the result, then don't remove the restrictions. That's what the Prime Minister was speaking about.
We see the threats. We heard the Prime Minister's words yesterday. There's a lot of controversy about how the Prime Minister got in front of the Congress to begin with. You were kind of the architect behind all of this yourself, Ambassador Dermer. Is the means worth the end as you do this controversially?
Well, look, I'm sorry that there was a perception of partisanship in any way. As I said, that was not our intention to take a side in your political debate. We deeply value the support we have on both sides of the aisle in the United States. Support for Israel has always been bipartisan, and we hope it will always continue to be bipartisan. That was not our intention in any way. We also did not intend to show any disrespect, as I said, for the president or the office of the presidency. And I wish in this case that would not have happened. But the most important thing for us was to have the opportunity, once Speaker Boehner made this invitation, to speak up on an issue that could threaten the survival of Israel. 75 years ago, the Jewish people did not have a voice. We certainly didn't have any power to defend ourselves. We were a defenseless people in the face of our enemies who were seeking to annihilate us. But we also did not have a voice. We couldn't even raise our voice that could be reckoned with among the nations. Now at least the Prime Minister of Israel has a voice, and we're blessed that we also have the ability to defend ourselves. And what you heard yesterday was the Prime Minister as the leader of the one and only Jewish state speaking up in the face of genocidal enemies that call for Israel's destruction. The Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran tweets out that Israel must be annihilated. He works for Israel's annihilation every day. We don't feel it's a threat just to Israel. We think it's a threat to the whole world, just like the Nazis were not only a threat to the Jewish people, they were a threat to the whole world. But he felt the deepest moral obligation to speak up. And I can only tell you, Ron, that I hope that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when they look back at this episode, if anyone bothers to do that, they'll be talking about whether there was a violation of protocol, yes or no, and not thinking about the great danger of we're living in a world now with a nuclear-armed Iran, because that would have meant, if that's the case, we'll know that the world, if they're focusing on protocol, we'll know that the world is safe and that we avoided this catastrophe.
At the same time, we have had great relations. Israel and the U.S. Have considered themselves allies since the beginnings here, since 1949. Prime Minister Netanyahu, since 1996, has had the occasion to work with Presidents Clinton and Bush, and now with Obama. And it just doesn't seem that we have the same relation today that we did 4 years ago, that we had 8 years ago, that we had 10 years ago.
No, I don't think that's true. We have a very strong relationship with the United States. The Prime Minister spoke about that alliance specifically at AIPAC. He also thanked the President yesterday for the many things that have occurred that he has done for Israel, the terrific security cooperation we have, the intelligence sharing that we have, support for Israel at the United Nations by fighting against these anti-Israel resolutions. There are many things that the Prime Minister mentioned yesterday that President Obama has done for Israel that people don't even know about, like his request. He responded to the Prime Minister's urgent request for assistance on 3 separate occasions that the Prime Minister spoke about yesterday. In the Carmel forest fire, we had this huge forest fire in Israel in 2010 when we had our embassy under really a siege in Cairo with a mob outside, and the President was there for us. And also in the case of Iron Dome assistance, this anti-missile defense system that we do in cooperation with the United States, we had a special request in the middle of the war, and the President was there. So we have disagreements with the United States. There's no question we have a serious disagreement on what is a very serious issue. That's how to best stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. But we also have a very, very strong alliance. Our relationship has weathered over the years, since 1948, many instances of serious disagreements between the U.S. and Israel. We have weathered those disagreements, and we have built a stronger and stronger alliance decade after decade because it's anchored in the deepest values that we share. And I expect that we will weather these disagreements to build a stronger U.S.-Israel alliance in the future, because I don't think we don't have any better ally in the United States than better ally, I should say, in the world than the United States. We believe that the United States doesn't have any better ally in the world than Israel, and certainly in the region. We are your only solid, reliable, democratic ally. And I think this alliance is going to grow even stronger in the decades ahead. You
talked about wanting this to be a nonpartisan visit, a nonpartisan issue, but at the same time, you had a number of Democrats who chose not to attend the speech in the joint session. Does that concern you? Does that concern the Prime Minister?
Well, I had an opportunity to speak to a number of them and to express our views, and it's unfortunate that they didn't come. I guess each one had a separate reason, so you'd have to ask them. It's very important for us that Israel remain a bipartisan issue in the United States, and I will work to do whatever I can as ambassador to ensure that Israel remains above politics and to not be part of your internal political debate. And I'm confident that now that people heard what the Prime Minister had to say and his support that he expressed also for the President of the United States, which I think people heard loud and clear, that yes, we have these disagreements, but we stand together on so much. I'm confident that we could work to ensure that bipartisan support for Israel remains very strong in the future.
At the same time, Ambassador, I mean, you are taking heat for maybe, at least in the minds of some, overstepping your bounds in making this happen. Are you concerned in your role in this?
No, I've actually been. I've seen the relationships that I've been able to develop on both sides of the aisle since I've been here as ambassador. I think I've met with maybe over 80 senators and about 250 members of Congress, and I see very strong support for Israel across the board. And I don't feel that I don't feel in any way that it compromises my ability to do my job for the state of Israel, which I'll continue to do in a bipartisan way. And I think now that the speech is over, I hope people will focus not on the protocol and the politics, focus on the content of the speech. And I'm confident that that's going to happen in the weeks and the months ahead.
The Prime Minister has been in office since 1996. He is up against the Zionist Union leader Isaac Herzog here in just a couple of short weeks in an election, and it sounds like the Prime Minister took a nice bump in the polls because of this speech, because of this stance back at home. How is this message playing at home?
Well, I don't know. I'm here in Washington. I'll just correct you with one thing. The Prime Minister was first Prime Minister in his first term between 96 and 99, and then he was out of office for 10 years, and he came back in 2009, and he's been Prime Minister for 6 years since then. So all said, about 9 years, and Israelis will go to the polls in a couple of weeks, and we're a democratic country, and thankfully everyone in our country has a right to speak and a right to vote and a right to practice their religion freely. It's something that a lot of our neighbors don't have. So we'll have to wait for the Israeli people to decide what they want to do moving forward.